Hi, you do not want to miss this episode. We're speaking to Gillian Irving about student rentals. How can you put student rentals in your portfolio? Hi, everyone. Welcome to Control and Compound with Darren Mitchell. I'm your host, and joining me as always, Christina Wyatt. Christina, how you doing today?
Hey Darren, I am doing great. How are you doing today?
I'm excited. Student rentals. I got to tell you, we have a bunch of clients doing it, and we were fortunate enough to meet Jillian at a real estate conference we were at, who gave a great presentation. I'm excited to learn more about student rentals.
Yeah, I'm super pumped for this one too. Something that I've had my eye on and have been interested in learning more about. So, very excited to get started. But before we do, I just want to remind everybody, if you're listening on your favorite podcast platform, please make sure you subscribe and leave that 5-star review. And if you're listening or watching on our YouTube, make sure you like, subscribe, and hit that bell button so you always know when new content's coming out. And don't forget to follow us on our socials at Control and Compound on Instagram and TikTok.
All right. Okay, so let's introduce Jillian. This is Gillian Irving from investinstudentrentals.com. Jillian, how are you today?
I am great. Thank you so much, Darren and Christina. Great to be here.
Jillian, we were so impressed with the presentation you gave at Toronto at the Real Estate Investor Summit. We said we got to get you on the podcast. So let's jump into it. So tell me a bit about yourself and how you get involved in real estate investing. Like most of us, since you were 5, you bought your first house, and you've been doing it ever since. So tell me your real estate journey. How did you end up in real estate?
Well, I think like many investors who started, I had, a regular 9 to 5 job. I was a market research analyst. I was always super interested in numbers from forever, and as I started having a family and young kids, I thought to myself, how do you get ahead? I mean, honestly, you can't work more hours in your 9 to 5, like more hours in a day. There's only 24 hours. How are you supposed to actually accelerate your earnings and your savings? And so I really sat with that for a while. And then I think like a lot of investors, I read that book, Rich Dad, Poor Dad. And my mind was really opened to the idea that you could get someone else to pay off a monster debt for you, and you could watch that asset sort of appreciate over time. So while I was mulling around and letting that rattle in my brain for a while, I went for a run one day, and there was this amazing house for sale in this incredible location just down the street from where we left. And so I went for a run, and I came back, and I said to my husband, we've bought a house. And he said, what do you mean? Like, you just went for a run one day. But I saw this property, and I just knew that it was the right one for us. So we ended up buying that duplex, which is in a great pocket of Toronto called Leslieville. It's right off a main street. It's like totally connected to transit, beautiful duplex. And, a couple of years later, we were able to, pull money out of it. And I thought, you know what? I invested without a strategy of any sort. I was just, we bought this property, and I kind of hoped and prayed it would do what everyone told me it would do. And I thought, okay, we've done really well with this. What would happen if I actually became a true student of real estate investing? So we rolled up our sleeves. I dug into, reading pretty much everything, going to every meetup group you could think of. I hired a coach because I really wanted to be a good steward of those funds and put it in a strategy that made sense for us. So that's what I did. I got a coach, and then I took that money and I sort of redeployed it into a new strategy. But that's how I got started. I consider myself an accidental investor, but here we are all these years later. That was 2009, so it was a while ago. Yeah.
That's awesome.
Yeah.
Yeah, no, and the story is much like Rich Dad Poor Dad. Like I'm pretty sure he went out for runs to find his properties too, right? No, that's awesome. So you started with duplex, but that's not what we're talking about today, right? We're talking about student rentals, where a lot of people would turn, run, and hide. They don't want to get into the student rental. It kind of seems a bit scary, a little bit risky for individuals. So how did we end up? How did you get to the student rentals? How did you get where you are now?
Yeah. Well, it's pretty funny because whenever I go to a party or and I tell people I'm in student rentals, everyone, in some form or other is like, oh my gosh, why would you do that? Ooh, that sounds horrible, or that's so risky. And I think that's really the most common misconception about student rentals. It is this like terrible strategy where, you have these animal house parties and your kitchen, your living room furniture ends up on the front lawn or floating in the pool or something crazy like that. I mean, we all saw the movie. So, but the truth is, I surrounded myself with a really great coach. I aligned myself with people who were doing what I wanted to do. And student rentals is actually just a really amazing cash flowing strategy. It's way more robust than a single family home, just because you're not renting your property as a unit, you're renting the rooms in it. So when you look at the returns of a single family home versus the returns of renting it out by the room, the numbers are really compelling. So I was looking for a strategy that would advance my earning potential, right? Like that was my goal. How do I improve my 9 to 5 job? How do I retire myself out of a job? And student rentals was the most, to me, was the real estate strategy that had the most robust cash flow. So I landed on that one. And I figured I got to figure out how to hack the system and be wiser than these students. And so that's what I've done over the years, right? Is just to figure out ways to kind of minimize my risk, take advantage of the cash flow, and then just keep carrying on.
Cool. So let's talk about that rent per room. So instead of a 3 or 4 bedroom house where you say it's going to be $2,000 a month or 1,500 a month, you go in and you rent per bedroom, and then do you typically add a bedroom, or like is there opportunities in some of the places you have where you had 3 bedrooms, you turned it into 4 or 5, and how'd you do that?
Yeah, so of course, because our our revenue model comes from renting to students, we obviously want to maximize the number of students you have in a house. So whenever I look at a property, I'm always kind of thinking like with an architect hat or a designer hat on me, thinking like how many rooms can I safely and realistically put in this house to get the number of students possible. So I've bought a lot of properties where, a living room has become a bedroom, or a finished basement has become 3 bedrooms, or a master bedroom has become 2 bedrooms. And so, I really like properties that can become 6 bedrooms or 7 bedrooms. There's some jurisdictions where they'll allow even more than that, but those get a little bit more complicated. But yeah, it's all about maximizing, always remembering, of course, that you have to know your local area's bylaws, but maximizing the number of rooms. And each new room then is like another 650 or 750, depending what market you're in, per month, right? So you want to think about maximum number of rooms wherever possible. And the good thing, I guess, about student rentals too is like if you're fixing up a living room, for example, or switching that into a bedroom, it's not a complicated renovation. You're adding drywall. Like sometimes it's super easy, and it doesn't have to be a monster renovation like a duplex conversion or adding an extra suite or anything like that. You're like, no, we're just putting up some drywall in the living room, and that's an extra $700 a month.
Cool. And then how does the lease work? So is it one lease? Does everyone have a separate lease? How does the
That's a really great question. So every university or college town will have its own sort of personality, right? And I mean that in terms of like when the students start looking and how students fill houses. There's some jurisdictions where students move as little groups and pods, like they're a group of 6 students or 7 friends or whatever the number is, and they look together. Um, in places like that, you get all your friends to sign on one lease. That's what you want. But there's some areas where the universities just aren't set up that way. Like it's individual people who don't really know each other. And that's more complicated because people who don't know each other are a lot more reluctant to get on the same lease with people they don't know, right? Because obviously now your obligations are entwined. So sometimes they're on separate leases, but wherever possible, I try to rent to groups because that's one of the risk mitigation strategies I'm going to talk to you about later is that single lease. And like most jurisdictions also see one lease as something that's acceptable to them. They're willing to consider that a single family unit because people are agreeing to sign together. And single leases look to jurisdictions and to the fire department and to financiers and to lenders as a rooming house. And that can often set off some red flags. So wherever possible, get everyone on one lease. That's one of the goals I look for, is those areas where students tend to look together.
You mentioned could be challenges if you have single leases. So how do the lending institutions or the banks when it's mortgage time look at a student rental versus a traditional investment property?
I'd say that that's probably one of the, like, when you have your pros column and your cons column, I would say financing probably goes in the column. But so when you buy a property, if you just buy a regular house and you want to switch it into a student rental, there's no problem with financing. You just buy it and then you can switch it into a student rental, no problem. It's if you're trying to refinance your existing student rental, or you want to purchase an existing student rental, the number of lenders who want to participate in that niche is quite a bit lower. So you need to work with a trusted mortgage broker to help you with that. Like, that strategy is just a little bit more complicated. It's not that you can't, it's just there's not as many to choose from. They don't like it as much, which is weird, because if anyone's been watching the news lately, we all know how many international students there are, how much students are looking for places to rent, that there's nowhere for anyone to go. Rents are going insane. So I don't really know why the lender aversion to student rentals is so sticky, especially in these days. But there you go. Yeah. It is.
Now you're in Ontario, and
Yeah.
some of the student rentals, what the cost to purchase a house for someone going to university in Toronto, I can imagine is astronomical. Is there certain regions you look for as a sweet spot in student
Yeah.
rental, or can it work anywhere?
Well, I mean, it can work anywhere. I think like Ontario investors, for example, are struggling with cash flow anywhere, especially in this interest rate environment. It's a little bit trickier. I've been looking out east recently. I've acquired 4 properties in the past 4 months out in New Brunswick. The numbers there are just easier. The houses are much less expensive. So, if you're yield shopping, you might not want to stay in Ontario. You might want to go out to Alberta, where the prices are a bit cheaper, or out east. Yeah, so it's hard. It's hard in Ontario. It's hard in British Columbia. You really just have to kind of roll up your sleeves and do some digging to see the relative prices of these properties versus what rents you can expect, because it certainly does vary across the country at the moment.
Okay.
And when you're setting them up, my question on like the where you want to pick them, how far away typically from a university or school do you want to be looking for these properties? Because I can't imagine they got to be a pretty small radius in where we're choosing from, right?
Yeah, having invested in so many different locations over the years, I have to say this. Every university is different. If you're in Kingston and you go to Queens, you better buy a house in the student ghetto, because that's where all the students live. They don't want to take even a 5-minute bus ride. It doesn't make sense for them. In Peterborough, they are willing to get on the bus because they don't have a kind of defined area where houses are typically located. In Welland, they actually want to be on the main street. They want to be right across the street. In Hamilton, you want to be within walking distance, but they're okay with the bus. So every university is a little bit different, and you need to know what the student preference is, because you don't want to be the one house that's in the weird location, or you think, oh, this is perfect, it's just a 10-minute bus ride. That actually might make or break your property. So again, being an area expert, like any investment strategy, is going to really serve you well. Yeah. So you have to get to know each market you're investing in a little bit better.
So let's talk about some of those risks and how you reduce those risks of students are poor, they have no money, students are going to have parties and trash your place. How do you deal with the perceived negatives anyway of student rentals to reduce your risk?
Right. So you're right. Those are exactly the 2 common fears. Like, am I going to get paid, and is my house going to get ruined? Like, this is the question everyone has. And what is super fascinating about students is that they almost always pay. Like, you do not have rent risk with student rentals. And the reason why is because universities or college or whatever your post-secondary journey is, it's a destination. These kids, and probably with the help of their parents, have been working a really long time to get somewhere, right? So they're not going to leave home for their post-secondary journey and be like, oh, shoot, I forgot about rent. Like they know that they want to go to this place. They've worked really hard to get the grades they need to get into that specific program. Rent and whatever is required to get them through that program is factored in. So students pay their rent. I've never had a student who hadn't paid their rent. But having said that, we can and we do require student parents to sign guarantor forms. And that's like just a commonplace expectation now. Two of my kids have come and gone through university. I had to sign on the dotted line as well to be a guarantor. And so it's a fascinating safety mechanism in terms of rent that you don't get in any other strategy. You've got the child on the lease, you've got the parent on the lease. So you've got two people who are willing to pay in this circumstance. And that's a safety mechanism that I don't see in any other strategy. I mean, imagine if you had your house rented to a single family and whatever the renter didn't pay. Like you can't phone up their parents and say, hey, your kid didn't pay rent this month. So it's kind of a surprise fact about student rentals is that from a payment perspective, it's super safe. And what I will add in here too, just about student rentals in general, I think landlords in Ontario, especially in this rising interest rate environment, often get tenants who stay and who don't move out. And so you can get caught like with renters who are behind market rent, right? But in student rentals, your students come and your students go. Like it's a really natural cadence for when they rent and then when they leave. And then once they leave, you reset the rents to market rent. So that's like, again, another kind of safety mechanism or sort of like a safety mechanism that exists in this strategy. But back to your original question, Darren. So the risk of paying, so I don't worry about kids not paying because they do. And if they don't, we have their parents who do. And damage. So damage is a thing that you have to worry about, not in terms of people willfully kind of destroying your house, but when you have 7 20-year-olds, whatever, living in your house, I'm sure anyone who's parents or who knows 20-year-olds know that they're not exactly the cleanest or who remember their own university days. Like I think back to mine in the house I lived in with, 5 girls and like, it's not a pretty sight to think back to. So what we do for sort of damage, and no 20-year-old will ever like put up their hand and say, oh yeah, that's me. I, put the hole in that wall, or I was the one who broke the closet door. There was like, wasn't me. It's like a game of like hacky sack or pass the buck, right? No one ever takes responsibility. So what we do is we have all our tenants and all our students sign like it's easy. It's a move in and move out form. Like let's all agree what the state of this property is before you move in. So like there's no one can say that was there when we got here. Like we're all agreeing on the state of the property when you move in, and then we're doing the same thing when tenants move out. And so as a part of the lease, I have like, this is what it costs to repair things. So the expectation is set really early on that, if a screen is broken, if a door is broken, if a wall is damaged, like this is what things are going to cost. So they know that this nice, beautiful house is to be returned to me in the same condition that I got it in. And if not, this is what it's going to cost you to fix it. So like those are some of the little strategies I use just to stay on top of the sort of day-to-day damage. And then the bigger picture obviously is making sure you have the right insurance for your property. You need to have student rental insurance. You can't just have regular homeowner insurance. So that's just like a business basic. You have to start with protecting your investment with the right insurance, and then there's like other little strategies like that I use to keep it safe along the way.
Do you take a damage deposit from everybody? And have you ever had to go over the damage deposit, or do you take one at all?
In Ontario, you're not allowed to take a damage deposit. So all we can do is take first and last month's rent, and we're not allowed to use it for anything except for that. So that's why we kind of make it pretty clear what the state of the property is in. I make sure I have a clause in my lease that holds my tenants jointly and severally responsible for damage. That means like if Susie breaks the closet door in her room, we all know that Susie has to pay for the closet because it's in her room. But like what happens when mystery damage happens in the living room or the kitchen or whatever? If someone doesn't take accountability for that, then the lease, when it holds them jointly and severally responsible, means that they all have to pay, unless someone puts up their hand and says like it was me, which they never do. So, so in those cases, like everyone becomes responsible for the payment.
I love the every 12 months you get to reset the rent. Do you have many renters that like go for 2 or 3 years, and can you still increase the rent, or how does
Yeah,
that
so
work?
it's usually not a one year. Usually we have the tenants who will come in second year and stay like second, third, and fourth year, or sometimes second and third year. So I mean, on the occasions when they stay, yeah, we can only increase the rent by the rental guidelines, but we always know that we're within a year or two of being able to just turn over the house in its entirety and reset again to market rents.
And are you signing annual, like the school year obviously doesn't run quite in line with an annual lease. Do you typically have them sign an annual lease anyways for it,
Yeah.
or how does that work in the off season?
Yeah, we do. And it's so funny wearing the parent hat of signing a lease for a year when you know your kids are going to be home for the summer. I'm like, you better sublet that room. um, and then being a landlord. But the truth is that every landlord everywhere has 1 year leases. And then we just have to be, regular, reasonable human beings. If someone wants to rent for the summer, sublet for the summer, I allow that without question. Um, yeah, so the strategy would not work if we were only signing leases for the 8 months of the school year. So it's pretty standard out there that the leases are 1 year long, regardless of whether or not they're there or not. But yeah, we just let them sublet it.
Gotcha. And you
Hmm.
mentioned strategies for mitigating risk and some strategies around kind of managing students. Are there any other strategies that you have out there for managing? Well, I think I've heard we've all got teenagers or have had teenagers. They're not the easiest to manage at even their highest points. So, like, how do you manage working with students all the time?
So there, I have a couple of strategies. One is I really like property managers, so that I offload that, like the day-to-day stuff, to a team who is expert in this field. So, like any real estate investing strategy, you want to have a team that is well equipped and that is aligned to the strategy that you're employing. So, I like property managers who are used to working with students. And any other strategy you have, you should find your team that does the same, like whether it's your realtor or your accountant or whatever. So I have great property managers in my locations that are well used to students. But what I will do, is I think the most important thing for students is actually just to do a little bit of training. Um, and what I mean by that is most of these kids, when they move away from home, it's the first time they've ever gone. They have zero idea what their true responsibilities are as a tenant. They don't know what the responsibilities of the landlords are. And you really need to just, like, as a basic table stakes in this business, is to sit down and explain the lease to students, because I can promise you they do not read the document when you send it out for DocuSign. And I'll embarrassingly say my own son, like, I'm like, Aiden, I am a student rental investor. What do you mean you signed the lease without reading it? He's like, oh, I don't know. Like, anyway, so they don't read the lease. So they don't know what's going on. So you need to actually take them through. You need to take them through the lease. They need to understand that actually, when you live in a house on your own and the toilet is running, no one, like, there's no mom or dad to be like fixing that unless you actually alert someone that it's broken. And you would be surprised, like they wouldn't necessarily know to even do that. So it's like really basic, no, you cannot take out the batteries out of the smoke detector. Yes, you must phone someone if something is broken. And anyway, and it's really just taking them through page by page what their obligations are. And they're like, really? Oh, that's fascinating. But once they know, right? And so at least you know how to plug them into the system for how to get things attended to if it needs to be attended to. And I think that's really the most basic, like, minimizing the risk is just to kind of open up their minds a tiny bit.
You mentioned property management. It
Yeah.
is now maybe this is just my biased opinion. I'm thinking student rentals are going to be a little more work for a property management company. Do
Yeah.
they charge more for student rentals, or is it similar to what you'd pay for a regular one?
No, it's pretty much the same. It's pretty much the same. Um, yeah, they just, I think if you've got a property management company again that's expert in there, I don't think it's any much more work for them, really.
Cool. Now, Gillian, you also people are going to listen to this and go, "Wow, I want to learn more about student rentals. How do I find out more?" So tell us about how you help teach the student rental game to individuals.
Well, it's funny you should ask because I'm actually in the process right now of developing an online course, so that should be ready in the next couple of months. And I'm also relaunching a coaching program for people who want sort of more hand-holding through the process. Like an online course is great; it'll give you all the information you need. But oftentimes, when people are investing in something big like real estate, they want access to someone who they can ask questions to, and they want a little bit more interaction rather than just a course. So I'm going to be offering that as well. And you can get more information at investinstudentrentals.com. You can reach out to me there to contact me.
We're going to throw that link down below. So anybody that's listening, if you want to get in contact with Gillian, make sure you click the link below to reach out because sounds like there's a lot to learn, and it's nice that you've already learned it. So it's nice to learn from you versus not one that you want to learn on your own. It's great to get ahead of the game on that.
It's pretty funny because I say that my lease is kind of like a living, breathing document because every time you think you've figured out the last possible way they can sneak something on you, they surprise you and something else happens. And so my lease is a living, breathing document, and I'm always learning. And I'm always learning ways in which to improve it and make it sort of more bulletproof. Like I'll tell you one funny story. I had a group of tenants. I had a house in St. Catharines, and it had one of those interior garages, and one winter, I think it was like the coldest winter on record, and my tenants their utilities were included in their lease, and they had. I think it was like a 3-day long interior beer pong tournament, and they heated the garage with electric space heaters. And my bill was insane. And so I'm like, you've got me, but you'll never get me again. So now I have something called a utilities cap, which is if the utilities, like I'm willing, if utilities are included, that's fine. But I have a cap at which, like, if it's exceeded, they have to pay the difference so that I was never stuck with like a $1,300 electric bill in winter ever again, right? So again, I'm always, dodging interesting little things that happen and always refining my lease to avoid
Oh,
it.
cool. So sometimes utilities are included. What about some of the other stuff like internet or any of that stuff? Is that all on the students, or is that?
You know what? I'm trying wherever possible. Obviously, if you're renting to groups, it's way easier to offload the utilities to a group if they know one another. And I think again, like utilities are the wild card, right? It's just an expense that can really go up or down depending on what your students are doing. So wherever possible, I try to get utilities in the kid's name. And internet, I just will not touch anymore. It is not worth the headache. Like if the internet goes down, I can promise you it will be on the eve of some exam. And you just don't want to be responsible for that, and there's nothing you can do to troubleshoot internet like if you're not on site. So that is something I insist that my students take on themselves. They can have the screaming matches with whatever their service provider is when it goes out before their exams, not me.
Great advice. Christine, anything else you wanted to ask Gillian before we wrap up?
Yes, I've got one more question, Gillian. I was wondering if you might be able to walk us through an example of one of the student rental properties that you have and what those numbers would look like from a cash flow perspective.
Sure, I'd be happy to do that. So just recently, I've switched my attention from Ontario out to New Brunswick. And I managed to find a property out there in a town that has both a college, a university, a regional hospital. So a town that kind of meets my sort of investment objectives. And I bought a house there for $225,000. I mean, when you're in Ontario, if something starts with a 2, I mean, that's not possible, right? So super affordable from like an entry level option. So the house I bought was for $225,000. If I rented that to a single family, I think on the super high end, I would expect to get $1,800 a month in terms of rent. So, but because I'm renting it to students, that same house that would get $1,800 of rent, if I rent that to 6 students and they each pay $565, that's $3,390 a month versus $1,800 a month in rent. And so once you like strip away, your property management, your maintenance fees, the utilities, all of the things that you need to take away, that property, even though it's inexpensive, still was in a negative cash flow position of about $465. But the cash flow rented to 6 students at $565 per month is over $1,000 in cash flow a month. So it's a huge difference in terms of what you can expect for that property.
Oh, what a great wrap up. Thanks so much. All right, Gillian Irving, check out investinstudentrentals.com. Thanks for watching. Thanks for listening. Have a great day. Thanks for listening to this podcast. If you're listening on YouTube, please like, subscribe, and hit that bell button. If you're listening on your favorite podcast platform, please leave us a 5-star review and subscribe. And if you want more information, check out our website, controllandcompound.com, and you can sign up for an education session with one of our wealth coaches.